necessarily.
But
anyway.
we wouldn't be.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Moscow Board of Adjustments meeting for September 27th, 2016. With that, let's start with the meeting minutes from August 2nd. Does anybody have corrections, comments, scriveners?
I move approval of the minutes from August 2nd, 2016.
Okay, we have a motion.
Joe, I do have some questions about it. I don't know if you want to wait till there's a motion or... Well, there already is a motion. So.
We have a motion.
A second.
We have a motion. We have a second.
Do you mind if I ask some questions about it?
Not at all. Before we vote, go ahead and do that.
So these are more about what's reflected in the minutes than the minutes themselves. So questions about two things, and some of this is probably from Mike and Ann, but I noticed that the RCS for the variants are not included in here. Are they not typically included in minutes? Because we're required to provide written decisions, and so the minutes suggest that the RCS were those suggested by staff with some addition that's not really articulated in the minutes. And so it sounds like nobody on the board actually saw written RCS. Is that accurate? Did you guys ever see the final written RCS?
The chair reviews those and signs on behalf of the board.
Right, but that's different than the board actually approving them. So the board has to issue, the board issues written decisions. Those are, I mean, that's state law. That's not our code.
Yeah,
the state requires that we issue, that the board issue written decisions.
Yeah, the board approved them at the meeting.
But not in, there were no written, so. Well, I know, but they were amended at the meeting. And the Supreme Court has said there's a difference between approving them at a meeting and then issuing written decisions. And if the board never sees the decision in writing, it can't approve the written decision. And so I'd never thought about it much before, but I kind of assumed that we would see them in minutes, and then when we approve the minutes, we're approving the written RCS.
Yeah, the board does it a little bit differently because of the meeting schedule. And so we have meetings that are sporadic. You don't have a set schedule like Planning and Zoning Commission or City Council. So typically, the board, will have draft relevant criteria and standards for the board's review at the meeting. Board approves the language, and then the chair comes in and signs those. And so that's been our past practice with the board, and that was approved by our city attorney previously, who had who said that was all right.
Okay, well, I have concerns about it. Of course, it's the board's decision as to how we do that, not city attorney or staff, of course. But the fact that nobody saw the actual final RCS, and this body never approved the final written RCS, I find somewhat troubling. And we should at some point reconsider that approach, I think.
Well, the chair saw it and signed it, so it'd be one, the chair of the board.
We need three
acting on behalf of the board. We had that discussion before about having, we don't have anything scheduled at the next meeting. We could, 2 weeks from when the board meets and issues an approval on something, we can go back and conduct a meeting that takes 10, 15 minutes in order to approve the minutes in RCS. If the board certainly chooses to do so.
Well, that would be one option. The other option would be, because I saw them, I read them. I didn't see any discrepancies when I signed them, but...
well, that's another problem if you signed RCS
right.
for a proposal that you recused yourself.
But I think that if they were included in the minutes at the end, then we wouldn't have to have an extra meeting to meet just to sign something that the board directed the staff to write.
And it wasn't Joe that signed them, it was Linda.
Okay.
So she had chaired the meeting because of
the last
Joe's
one I signed were
recusing
minutes,
himself.
correct, from the previous? Yeah.
But because my concern with that is, right, this is the public record of the meeting. This is how we publish our records to the public. And there's nobody would be able from this document to tell what the RCS were.
Well, usually we attach those. So when these are posted, after the board approves them, we just didn't attach them to the minutes tonight because they've already been approved. signed by the chair. But when those are posted online, yeah, you're correct. Those are part of the record, so those will get attached to the back of the minutes. That's how we do it at City Council, Planning and Zoning Commission as well.
It's still, so, I mean, City Council presumably approves the written decisions at a separate meeting, and P&Z does as well.
They do.
But we're subject to the exact same requirements. I mean, so we are required by law to issue written decisions, and the reason it matters is because the time period, the 10-day time period for appeal does not start until we issue that written decision.
Correct.
Not the date of the meeting, the date the written decision is issued.
Correct.
And if we don't do that, if that doesn't happen at a public meeting, then a potential appellant has no way of knowing when Joe, or in that case Linda, went down and signed them. Right, so the date of the decision is not public. And you can see the concern I have. I mean, this is the type of thing that we're supposed to be, as the board, issuing the decision.
Applicant knows because of the letter.
The applicant knows, but potential challengers don't know. People who might want to appeal the decision don't know.
Sure. Yeah, we can
Which would be why it should not happen until we approve the minutes, I think.
Sure. Yeah, and we can address your concern with the city attorney, and if the board's willing to meet a week or so after approval of RCS, just to approve the minutes as well as the RCS, then we certainly could do that.
I have one more. Well,
While we're on that subject, Mike, is it possible that we could get an email of the written minutes, and then if we have any concerns, get back with you before the chair signs it? Can it be done that way? I mean, I don't want to have to come to an additional meeting, a week after the hearing's been held to look at the minutes. If we could do it electronically, and then if we had concerns before the chair signed it.
I have to consult with our city attorney to see if that's legal. Usually if you have a quorum, you would have to notice that as some type of a public hearing, or not a public hearing, but a public meeting. Mm-hmm. So there'd probably be some issues with conducting business via email. So we'd probably have to conduct a meeting in person. But I can certainly talk to our city attorney about that.
okay, so that was the first thing. Well, the second one dealt with the reopening of the public hearing. And when was the decision made to reopen a public hearing on that application?
It was the first point of business.
So I have three concerns with that. This is for the board and everybody. The first is that we had already began deliberations on that matter, and I think just it's problematic to reopen a public hearing after deliberations have begun. Second, my reading of the ordinance does not authorize us to do that we can decide to continue it immediately after the closure of the original public hearing, and that's the only time we can continue it, and at that point to a specific date. And third, if the decision wasn't made to reopen the public hearing, until the hearing itself, then there's no way notice was provided for a hearing that was not decided that it was going to occur until the moment it occurred.
Well, we were aware from the board's, at the end of that meeting that was tabled, there was an intention of the board to open the public hearing by the chair. So we went ahead and noticed it as a public hearing at the next meeting. And so at this meeting, we had sent out notice that it was going to be a public hearing. The board voted, entertained a motion to reopen the public hearing. There was a second. They've all voted unanimously to reopen it, and it was opened at that point.
Right, now I know how it worked. I disagree that the board at the previous meeting intended to reopen the public hearing. That wasn't my understanding. I was at the first one. But at the close of the initial public hearing, there are 5 options. One is to schedule a continuation of the public hearing at a specific time and place. The other, which we chose after deliberating, was to table the application for further reflection. That's in fact what we did. And there's nothing that suggests that at that point we can reopen a public hearing that's already been closed. Particularly since after we've closed the public hearing, all that we can do is request additional factual information from staff or the applicant or the public. There's nothing that suggests we can reopen a public hearing at that point. And especially not a month later. But after deliberation, I think it's really problematic. That we had spent a couple hours up here, or some measured, I don't remember how long it was at this point, an hour deliberating before tabling and then reopening the public hearing after the applicant and everybody else has heard our deliberation is, to me, really problematic. But then I think in conflict with the ordinance, too. So Those are my
And I
concerns.
discussed this entirely with the city attorney before we even re-noticed it and before we went to the hearing that night and reopened it. So he was comfortable with it, and he gave us the go ahead and do that. And so typically with Robert's rules, you're able to entertain a motion in order to reopen
Right,
the
but
public
we're not
hearing.
governed, we're only governed by Robert's rules if we choose to, but those don't supersede the ordinance. The ordinance does not provide us the authorization to do that. I mean, that's at least the way I read it. I have some experience reading those things, a little bit at least.
Sure.
So those are my two concerns, and I think both are potentially significant. I mean, on this one in particular, where we knew that somebody might appeal, I don't know if that's happened, not knowing when the date to start the appeal is, and then potentially having a problematic public hearing that A, was opened improperly, and then B, you can't provide notice for a public hearing that isn't going to happen. And until the motion was heard, it wasn't going to happen. It's not effective notice if there's no public hearing to notice.
Yeah, we just went off the intention that it was going to
Yeah,
happen.
and I don't know,
from,
and
from,
I
from the
understand
chair.
that you
Yeah.
filled the room,
Yeah.
that people heard about it. I recognize that, but technically that's a problem. So that's what I had, and I'm going to abstain from that.
The motion was
Well,
to
we-
approve the minutes.
Yep, we have a motion, we have a second to approve the minutes as is. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I abstain because I was not here.
And I abstain.
So we have 4 ayes, 0 nays, and 2 abstentions. So they are approved. On to the topic for this evening.
Do I have the floor?
Yes, you do.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Before you tonight, we have a conditional use permit proposal for a group daycare facility. Location of the proposal is at 110 South Jackson Street. It's for the Learning Garden is the name of the establishment. It caters to children with disabilities. Typically, a group daycare is 6 to 12 children. And that's what this is proposed to be, even though it says large daycare at the heading there. Applicant's proposing up to 12 children with 3 full-time employees, as well as a behavioral therapist, which will be a one-on-one type therapist that would the applicant could probably speak a little bit more to. Hours of operation, as established in the application, are from 7 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. This is the property outlined in red on your screen. Contains a church building as well as an ancillary building here off the alley. This would be the property in question tonight. On the south side, you've got Jackson Street here to the west. You've got First Street here to the north. Surrounded primarily by commercial to the east. You've got Zion's Bank across the alley to the east. You have some multifamily residential to the north, as well as directly to the west. And you also have another Montessori school here to the northwest corner. This is the zoning configuration of the area. It's in the Central Business Zoning District. Directly across the street is the residential office zone. Taking a look at what the comprehensive plan says about the underlying land use designation. Chapter 3 within community mobility identifies First Street as a local neighborhood street, Jackson Street as a national highway. Within the economic development section, some of the goals are to provide for sustainable economic growth and employment opportunities where existing and new businesses can thrive while preserving and enhancing the character of the community. Another goal is to enhance and strengthen the regional economy, utilizing the strength and assets of the region. Taking a look at what our group daycare standards are, the first one is that off-street parking is adequate to meet the requirements of our parking section of the zoning code. This is properties within the Central Business Zoning District, which requires no parking. All properties within the CB zone are exempt from parking regulations. It does require one loading space for a group daycare. It allows a couple different ways in order for you to accomplish that. The first is on-street, has to be approved by the city engineer with a space reserved, by signage or otherwise generally available. Has to be located in the same side of the street as the daycare, and it has to be located has to be located at least 30 feet from any street intersection. And then the second option is that it be located off-street where the travel path of the loading space to the facility entrance does not cross vehicle maneuvering and travel areas. So when the children are dropped off, they can't be running behind the vehicles that's backing out is what that means. Applicants propose tonight, in order to satisfy this requirement, that they have one of these loading spaces be designated in the spaces directly off the alley. There were a couple spaces on street. There was a previous large daycare that wanted to go in the ancillary building of the church, but that never had gone in. We have a couple of those loading zone spaces that are currently out there. I think they're right now unutilized. So they would have the opportunity to use one of those as their loading zone, but they've indicated that they would like the loading zone right off the alley.
Joe, can I ask you? Mike, can you go back to that for a second? To
Sure.
clarify something. So, in the written materials, you have both that.
There was an error in the written materials, so you have three standards. There was a code amendment a few years ago to change that, and so these are what we had changed that to.
And does that also apply? Because you say both that permitted uses in the central business zone are not required to have off-street parking, and then you provide the parking requirement for daycare facilities for employees or staff members.
I had that same question. So they are not required to have 5 stalls for 4 employees at 1 1/4.
No, they're not required to provide any parking, but the board could certainly impose parking requirements on them, and we were just giving that as a comparison to what the parking requirements would be if they were required to do that.
And then on the second part, so you just mentioned that you have here that there was a daycare that was approved to operate in the church building, but it's no longer in operation. Does that mean that I assume that was the CUP as well, right?
Correct.
Is that expired then?
It's null and void.
Okay. So they would have to come to us to be able to begin operations again?
Correct.
Thanks.
Continuing on with the group daycare standards, there was a requirement that there be a contained or fenced outdoor play area that complies with spatial standards required for state licensing, which this one does. They currently have the existing area between the building and the church, as well as site-proof fencing or site-proof landscaping on the perimeter of the play area where necessary to protect privacy of neighbors' yards. The applicants installed a 6-foot-tall cedar fence all the way around the play area, and there's a 4-foot-tall fence that's been installed in the front of the property. This was the floor plan that was submitted by the applicant. You've got a vestibule in the beginning, entrance to the property, main room, kitchen, bathroom, and then the back porch area. This is the upstairs of the building, storage, staff break room, office, as well as additional storage and hallway space. This was the site plan that was submitted by the applicant. So we've got the existing house on the property where the use is proposed to be. Got the play area, which is between the use and the church here. This is Jackson Street here to the north, and you've got the parking area off the alley. This is probably a better view of the parking area. So this would be the building where the use is going to be established. You've got the alley running north-south with access to the parking area in the back. So this is an existing parking area. The applicant intends to install an ADA stall, so you'd have an 8-foot wide striped aisle as well as the 8-foot wide stall to have a van accessible ADA stall back there. Identified a loading zone stall to meet the loading zone requirement on the crosshatch here, and you'd still have enough room for another stall for a staff member. So 3 stalls in total, 1 ADA, 1 loading, and 1 regular stall behind the alley there. A couple shots. This is looking south. This would be the ancillary building for the church. You can see that's where the access would be gained to the stalls at the back of the building. And this is just a view looking west. This would be the house where the use is proposed to be established. And you've got the portion of gravel and the concrete pads where the stalls would be located. This is a view from the front of the property off of Jackson Street looking east. You can see the 4-foot tall cedar fence here. It transitions to a 6-foot tall and completely surrounds the property. There is an existing chain link fence here, which would be buffering the play area there to the north. So with that, staff recommends the board conduct a public hearing and consider any testimony presented as well as the relevant criteria and standards, and approve the application for the CUP to allow the group daycare at 110 South Jackson Street with no conditions. I'd certainly be able to answer any questions that you might have.
Questions for staff? You answered the one I had.
I have a few more. I'm still confused about the parking. So the written materials say there should be loading space for at least 2 vehicles. And then the 2 options, I assume these first 2 are the ones that are still apply. So on-street, and then off-street where ingress and egress would not require backing movements by vehicles. So the 2 that I noticed, for at least 2 vehicles and can't require backing. And you said there was 1 loading space, and that drawing looked like it's going to require that they back up to get out of it.
Yeah, so there was an error. This was carried over from another daycare application, and so there's only 1 stall that's 1 loading space that's required. We changed the code to this language here.
Okay.
So it's going to be, you had to provide the loading space in one of the following ways. So it's going to be on-street, subject to approval. We don't have to worry about that because it's not proposed to be on-street.
Right.
So the off-street is, so it used to be, where no backing movements by automobiles, subject to approval by the city engineer. So that was problematic because the city engineer never wanted to approve any loading zones where you could back out because it was, his license on the line should a child be, ran over. So we had amended that a number of years ago, and this is the current language. So off-street where travel path from the loading spaces to the facility entrance does not cross vehicular maneuvering and travel areas. So with the children being offloaded in the loading space, they'd go directly into the building, the entrance here, and they wouldn't have to go behind any vehicles that are reversing back out. And so that was the intention of amending that. So that would meet that second criteria for loading stalls.
Okay, so the loading stall is that crosshatch yellow,
Correct.
and then between it and the ADA, that clear space is what? That's the parking.
This?
Yeah.
That would be the ADA stall. So we're required to do an ADA, the crosshatched aisle. So you, next to any handicap stall, you have for van accessibility, you've got the 8-foot stall for the automobile, and then you've got the area, the bay right next to the stall that's used for wheelchairs or other, maneuvering of persons with disabilities.
And so even though children will be getting out of the back seat of a car and exiting directly into a parking stall, I mean, that seems like that requires that it doesn't seem like it satisfies that requirement of the parking, of the code, because they're exiting right into the parking area. Compared to like a typical drop-off where you pull up next to the curb and they get off right onto the curb. I mean, this one, you can see, if you imagine that red car is down a little bit and the kid's getting out of the back seat, it's getting right into where that other car is. They'll be walking out right to where a car pulls in.
But they're pulling in so they can see what's in front of them. They're
But
not
it doesn't matter what they can see. It's not doesn't
like
satisfy.
any parking anywhere.
It doesn't satisfy the requirements of the code. You go back to the code provision. You guys can't talk right now. So the travel path does not cross vehicle maneuvering and travel areas. There's no way for a child to get out of the backseat of a car without passing through vehicle maneuvering and travel areas. They're walking through a parking space where a car could be pulling right in.
Mike, will you go back to the photo? Handicap stalls that I've designed actually have the shared aisle on the right-hand side. So if that gray truck, say that gray truck was a van, an ADA van, it would actually pull into the spot that it's about to pull into, and then the side that's striped through would actually be to the right of it or to the north, which would be the shared aisle, where they would actually get out on that side of the car. So that would actually leave an open spot for people to get out of the car on the south side that's striped blue, or the yellow side that's striped yellow, and a person could get out onto an open path. So I think the stalls work, but I think they're striping them wrong.
It doesn't help the other side of the car.
It doesn't need
Parking
to.
space
It's still a parking space.
I know. But
And it's not through traffic. That defined it as through traffic, did it not?
maneuvering in travel areas. Maneuvering. And you would have on the right side of the car, you're still getting off into a parking space. I mean, that a parking space is clearly a maneuvering and travel area.
But actually, is that the parking space or is that the designated load space?
This is just an image to show a depiction of what can fit within that area. So they have some flexibility in order to, do whatever the board justifies as providing a safe loading zone for this use. So in the past, the maneuvering areas have been behind the car, and that's been staff's interpretation when we did the code amendment, and we carried this through the process. So that's been our historical interpretation. If the board chooses to interpret the section differently, you're certainly entitled to that.
Mike, how much space would you say is behind the car before you hit the alley right away? Is there
20 feet.
about another 20 feet there? Well, there's significant space behind the cars.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff? Thank you. With that, we open this up for public testimony. If the applicant would like to come up and speak about this application, state your name and address into the microphone, please.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Kowalski. My address is 412 East Mullen Avenue in Post Falls, Idaho, actually. I have a very long drive home, so I am the owner and director of the Learning Garden. We have come to the city of Moscow because we had a family that moved here and was looking for some services, and we found out that in this beautiful little town with a university that has a special ed department and a psych department, there are little to no services for children with disabilities. We've been looking for a year and a half for a building, and we had the luck to find this great little building here next to the church, and we're very excited about creating a community for children there. Our program is an inclusive child care program, so we have children with disabilities as well as typically developing children in our program. The focus is really about skill development, building social connections, and providing opportunities for the children to make deep, meaningful relationships. You may ask why that's important to the city of Moscow. It's important because it's important to the children and the families. It's important to the future of the city for everyone to feel like they belong. I appreciate all of the semantics about legalities and precision, concerns about safety. I think all of that is important to make sure that, again, the children are safe. But I encourage you to consider the great need that's in the community to meet these needs for the children and families, and know that we're here to do that. We just need the opportunity. And you guys are the gatekeepers. So that being said, do you have any questions about our program? Yes.
So I see that you're limiting the number of children at 12 children for
Correct.
now. Do
Correct.
you have any plans in the future of increasing that, or is that the limit that you?
No, certainly not at this site. What's very important for young children is to have consistent, close groups of connectivity. And so in order for us to individualize and really be able to meet the needs of all the children in our group, we need to have good child-to-staff ratios. That gives the teachers opportunities to work individually with children, to help them develop their interest and curiosities and be able to grow. We have the privilege of also being a developmental disability agency. We're not a typical child care program, so we provide therapy services in the community and the homes as well. So it's not something in the sense for child care piece that we would be looking to expand our revenue flow. We're really looking at this site because in this community, there is not a place for children with disabilities to come and be part of a group that they can build meaningful friendships with. You know, they can go to the park and they see a kid, may see him once, maybe twice in a month, but that doesn't help give them the multiple opportunities they need to build those social skills and connect. And so our primary focus with this site is to build that child-centered community. It benefits all of the children. The children without disabilities, they learn empathy, they learn to help others, they learn that difference is just different, and that's okay. It's something we all need to know. And so to answer your question, no, we will not be expanding to a larger group.
You're also aware that your permit limits you to 12. This permit application would limit you to 12 students. Right?
I'm fully aware. I completed it at that rate. Yes.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, are there any other people in the audience who would like to come up and speak in favor of this application?
My name is Christy Zinn, and I am the family that Kathy is talking about. Sorry,
can you
just a little emotional.
put for the record,
Yes,
your address?
my address is 318 Julie Drive, Moscow, Idaho. As a military family, life really is about transition and change. Excuse me. But as a parent of a child with trisomy 21 or Down syndrome, transition and change can impact their learning or even their cognitive growth ability. So Kathy and the Learning Garden have been a part of our family since my daughter was 2. We lived in Post Falls, and Matt commuted my husband to Fairchild Air Force Base from there. And it was really important that we found a preschool that would have stability and consistency, while also allowing our child to experience independent discovery. A year and a half ago, we experienced transition of even a larger magnitude, with my husband preparing to retire. We decided to return to Moscow, where I was born and raised, and also raise our children. And I really can't think of a better place than Moscow. I was offered a job at SEL in Human Resources, and I thought, I left 23 years ago, and I thought it was going to be a really easy transition to find daycare for Keeley. And the first challenge that we had as a full-time student, as well as a full-time employee, was to be immediately put on a wait list at University of Idaho. I had been on that wait list for 15 months, being told that I had priority as not only a full-time student, but also a full-time community member. It was not only looking for childcare for Keeley, but also for her little sister, Claire. I called 2 other preschools, and they did not have the ability to foster Keeley's needs. Cognitively and biologically, they told us that with her needing potty training and special care, that they couldn't even have her in the preschool room, that they'd have to put her in a toddler or infant room. This was very frustrating for us and not helping us as a family to have Keeley be included socially with her peers, as well as meet her cognitive and biological needs. Even where I work at SEL that has a stellar preschool that's called Little Edison School, they initially did not have the ability to meet her needs and have her in a peer classroom. They now have that capability, but we are still the 8th family on a long wait list. We're still waiting, again, like I stressed, for the University of Idaho, even though it's been 15 months, and I was told I was a priority. Keely's now 5, and she does spend part of her day in kindergarten at McDonald Elementary. We have spent the last year and a half in a preschool that is very known in the community that experiences attrition at a rate that is incredibly concerning. And they do not have currently the ability or the training to offer Keely consistency in her learning and development. Kathy has made an effort to still continue to be part of our lives as Keely's behavioral specialist in partnership with her daughter Taylor, who's also certified as Keely's aide, and works with Keely throughout the week. Moscow needs to have another preschool due to families not having options and being left on wait lists. Kathy's recognized in the Post Falls and Coeur d'Alene area, as well as the state of Washington and Idaho, for her services on the Panhandle Autism Society. And her Learning Garden Development Preschool offers children who do not fall into necessarily the typical range to be with their peers and have experience at the same level of care and education, and above all, inclusion. They have community meals where children learn the value of table and dramatic play and art and music and overall love. And I have to say, if you go past the site, you can already see the investment of heart and time and money, not only from Kathy and her husband and Taylor and the church community, but many community members in Moscow. I think this is something that's needed, and I encourage you to approve this. We have been on this search, and I can't tell you, as a former member of the community in Moscow, it's something that needs to happen. Thank you.
Please, step right up. State your name and address.
My name is Taylor Kowalski. I live at 1609 South Levick Street, apartment number 3. Just for some background on who I am Kathy's daughter, and I worked at the Learning Garden at our Post Falls site for like about 3 total years while I was in high school, and then I moved to Moscow in 2013 for college, and I lost the ability to keep working in Post Falls. Obviously, it'd be a long commute to go back an hour and a half every single day. And I didn't get to start working again until Christy moved with her family here to Moscow, and I started working with her daughter, Keely, again. And I wanted to speak because I think I can provide a unique perspective on the current state of her preschool and what specific points they're failing on, just to kind of illuminate what we mean when we're talking about meeting needs, and what needs beyond even just simple toileting or feeding or you know, making sure a kid's not crying or screaming that a child needs. With Keely in particular, Christy mentioned she's a child with Down syndrome, and with Down syndrome, there are a lot of associated developmental delays that are just a result of the disability, and one of the big ones is developing like fine motor and gross motor skills. Even learning how to speak is a struggle because your mouth has to learn those articulatory phonetics, and it's very difficult when you struggle to even control the muscles in your tongue. And Keely, on top of these challenges, she's also hard of hearing, and she needs to wear hearing aids to fully engage with her environment. And she also is able to use an iPad, a device that has a program on it that basically has a picture of the thing that she wants, and she can click it and go through and use that as her voice, so to speak. So she could say on there, "I want apples," rather than pointing and going, at an apple. It's two very different levels of communication. So that communicative device and her hearing aids are the two, honestly, vital things that child needs in the classroom, just like you wouldn't tell a child to go outside without any shoes on. It's just as fundamental for her. But when I'm not there, or there's not a teacher like directly next to her, her preschool is not able to provide those tools for her because they have too many children for their staff members. All the teachers there are kind and dedicated to children, but they're overwhelmed. There's just too much going on. They can't give Keely that individual need that she requires. So she's regressed in a lot of communicative goals that she was meeting when she still lived in Post Falls. The skills that she had as a 4-year-old, she's not consistently getting as a 5-year-old just because it's not expected in all these backgrounds. But one thing I really want to emphasize is I don't think it's a lack of affection or interest or compassion on the part of her current teachers, but it's lack of knowledge. And it's the overall philosophy of the program. It just has a very different focus than ours. I feel like what distinguishes us is our continued dedication to meeting a child at their needs and at their level and helping them to learn and explore the world in their own way, in their own language, not in the way that works for the adults or the teachers or gets through the routine, but in a way that actually meets that child as an individual and, like Kathy said, makes it a community experience rather than just showing up there until you get to go home again. So that's all I'd like to say.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else care to come up and speak?
I wasn't planning on speaking, so this is my words might not be super fluent. My name is Nicole Whiting, and I live at 1047 Schultz Road here in Moscow. And our daughter has autism. She's 6. Sorry. It's been a little over a year now that my daughter and I travel 3 days a week to Post Falls, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday to bring our daughter to school. We've gone through 3 preschools here in town, and like she said, it's not because we don't have teachers that care. It's that not all teachers are teachers for special education, and they haven't been educated in what a child with autism needs. And when there's 20 kids and 2 teachers, and you have 1 or 2 kids that have special needs, the object of the classroom becomes to make everything work. Well, when everything works, kids get lost. In the last year, our daughter has increased 100-fold because she has teachers that are invested in her lives, and they've met her where she's at and have adapted to teach her how she can learn. And every kid deserves that opportunity. Every single kid, whether they have special needs or not, deserves to be seen as a human being and seen as a child that deserves joy, that deserves to be invited to birthday parties because they have a community of kids that understand they're different and that that's okay. My child's 6 and has been invited to 1 birthday party in our community. She's been invited to 12 in the last year. And you can see it in her eyes when she gets to say, they asked me to their birthday party. Our community needs this because not as many families are as fortunate as I've been to be able to take the time over this last year and the next year if we have to drive my kid to school, to a place where she can thrive and she can learn and she gets the education and the groundwork to build a life that she deserves. And I would highly encourage you guys to think about our community as a whole and what we can do to invest in our young, whether they're special needs or not. So like I said, I'm sorry for getting emotional, but our families need it here. And we need a group of families that can rely on each other too. Because not everybody knows what it's like to live with a child with special needs. And your life is special in so many ways, and it's just as hard in so many other degrees. And we need to have a community of people that are supporting each other. Because some days aren't glitter and roses. Some days is poop and pee and dirt, and it's hard. And Moscow's doesn't have something right now that can offer that to us and our families. So I really encourage you to think about this and think about what it would do, not just for the families that are here, but as our community as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you.
Why not?
It's a pulpit. My name is Jody Tooley. I'm the pastor of the United Church of Moscow. And quickly, I'll just say we're here to speak in favor of the CUP this evening from the first day that Kathy Kowalski and later Stephen approached the church to ask if they could use that building. It's been a tremendously positive experience. Both Kathy and Stephen are very impressive in their understanding from the first moment of what it would take to create the space there that that complies with the regulations, has a safe, it wasn't 10 minutes, and they were speaking in terms of the fence they knew that was needed and all the construction that would happen to comply with what has to happen. It's been such a life-giving experience. It's been a true joy. We've made new friends over the fence, and we stand here with our new friends to help this to thrive. And so, what an exciting time! It's a fun project happening at First and Jackson. So, thanks.
Thank you. Who else? Go ahead and step up to the podium.
My name's Tim Johnson. I'm at 207 South Washington here in Moscow. It seemed like the board's only concern so far has been the parking issue. And Jerry, I completely understand you're saying. I mean, you don't want kids going, where there can be vehicles coming in and out. But I think just to say it pretty easily, you just flip the dash lines and the open spot on that blue box, and that's the blue dashes are where the loading and unloading zone is for the children on both sides. I mean, you could do the same thing with the yellow box too, or just keep the yellow box the way it is. So I mean, I think like what somebody was saying, there's plenty of space there. I do a lot of site plans and that kind of stuff for commercial real estate in the area, and there's plenty of room there to have a parking situation that will completely adequately have an unloading space for the kids. I think that's something that can be solved for sure. That's it.
Thank you. Anybody else care to come up and speak in favor? Okay. Is there anybody who would like to come up and speak not in favor? Okay, seeing none, I'm closing the public hearing and we'll let the board deliberate.
Well, I think this is an excellent proposal, and there's no question that we need a daycare and a school, a facility like this for our community, and this helps answer some of the needs that we need. I mean, I wish we had 5 of these facilities. So the question for us is basically, is the facility adequate? Is the location adequate? And I believe it is. I think that it might not be ideal, but it's still good. It will work. And I've got no qualms whatsoever about approving this application. I think it will work just fine.
Other comments?
I agree with Marshall. I think Marshall has spoken well, and I agree that the location for this is pretty good because it's a community location. There is a church, there is a bank, there are apartments. It's a residential, fairly dense residential area, and I think it will work fine with some juggling of the parking, and I would be very much in favor of it.
So I support the proposal generally, and the RCS is proposed by staff. However, with one thing that's missing, dealing with the parking, because as written, there's absolutely nothing within the approval that would require anything for that parking space. And so it was proposed with no conditions, and so no guarantee that it in fact would comply with the code provision. And I totally agree that there's something that we worked out there, but I'm more than happy to support this with a condition that loading space be provided with space on both sides of the car for children to get out that is not parking space. Is that, I don't know how we say that a parking space is not a maneuvering space. There will be cars there. I don't think it can satisfy the code provision without some sort of requirement in that vein. And if there's space there, we can make it work, we can make it work. But I would like to have a condition of some sort that provides for that. Because as it is, there's nothing in here that would govern the parking in any way. It would just be trusting the applicant. Which I'm not saying we can't, but you all know that's not how I do things. So, Mike, what's the... So you drew what's up there, right? That was not... Because looking at the... I mean... And I have done these kind of things, so I'm not criticizing these at all. But the two drawings are inconsistent with each other in terms of the amount of space available for parking. And I really don't understand this one, but that can be just me, where there's a large playground area to the north.
Yeah, I did that with GIS just to prove there was enough space there. I mean, the applicant, what the applicant submitted is accurate as far as the number of stalls that could fit within there, but the scaling's a little off.
Right. So what is the number that could actually, if they were traditional stalls, there could be 4 in there.
Correct.
Of what width?
9 feet.
9 feet.
Yep.
And then the ADA stall has to be how big?
Well, the van accessible stall has to have a total of 16 feet in width, 20 feet in depth. So however you finagle that, it's usually 8-foot wide stall and an 8-foot wide aisle.
Okay, so we have 36 feet to deal with, more or less?
Correct.
Do we know that's about what's
Yeah.
there?
Yeah.
And the applicant wants the ADA accessible stall? That was the request of the applicant?
Correct. Well, anytime you have a change of use that requires an ADA stall, if you're providing, I guess if there's no stalls back there that you're providing, then no, you don't have to provide an ADA stall. But if you provide stalls, then yes, you have to create one. So, I guess an option would be if you were to, there's 20 feet off the alley, so they certainly could have a stall right here. You could shift this stall. You could have enough room on this side, so you don't really need this stall because no parking is required in central business. So if they wanted to eliminate this one, shift the loading zone over so you had 3. Usually the standard width for maneuvering is 3 feet for an accessible route. So you could have 3 feet on either side of the loading zone stall, which would satisfy that requirement. And then you could probably fit, there's just this little landing here is why it becomes constrained. But here you can move this over. That's probably 3 to 4 feet in width there, so you could still fit another stall if the applicant choose to do so. But you'd have enough room to move the loading zone stall over, have a 3-foot striped aisle here, and have a 3-foot striped aisle on the other side of the loading zone stall.
That's what I would like to see. And I think that's required to satisfy the code. That's at least the way I read it. Thoughts?
I'm in. I think it's a really useful thing the community could gain if we approve this.
Yeah, I'm looking for someone to
So I have
provide
one,
a motion.
if that's okay. So to approve the proposal as provided to us with the condition that the loading space, the designated loading space go ahead. Before
I think we already had a motion and
No,
that was for the
no,
minutes.
that was for
the minutes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
What do you say, 3 feet is adequate? So with the loading space have on both sides a 3-foot passageway that would not have any cars parking in or maneuvering in it. I don't know how that would be carried out, but some kind of marking that clearly indicates.
Yeah, probably a 3-foot aisle on either side of the loading zone stall.
Okay.
So basically, we'd have two parking stalls. One would be a van accessible stall that has the appropriate striping, and another loading stall that has designated aisles on either side. Correct?
Yeah, basically.
Is that the end of your motion?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll second the motion.
We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye?
Aye.
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 Aye. Unanimous.
No discussion needed, apparently.
It is approved.
And did that make sense?
And did your motion include
I did not.
staff's writing?
I did not.
Okay.
Um,
So now we need to deal with the 7 criteria.
So so the approval contains the condition. And I personally, and I believe this satisfies the question I had earlier, at least I hope it does. I personally am satisfied with the RCS as proposed. I mean, on the one hand, I think we're supposed to do this on our own. If we get in the habit of just adopting staff's writings, we might get in trouble, but I think they provide legitimate explanation on each of the 7. So I'm happy to propose a motion, if you're willing to accept it, we adopt the RCS as written.
Prior to me being in this spot, everyone was looking to me during these meetings to come up with this language that the staff does for us ahead of time, so I am more than happy to allow that.
Yeah, I think everything the staff has provided is satisfactory, and
clear.
can't think of anything I would add. So I move that we adopt the RCS as provided by staff.
So I have a motion? Question?
I'll second it, and then I have a question.
Okay. I have a motion, you have a second, and a question.
Okay. Well, as written, it says, take number 1 there, the proposed use is or is not a conditionally permitted use. Do we need to go through and strike the one that does not apply?
That's a good point.
Okay. So I would
let me see if this works. So Alex, well, if you're okay with this, the first one will cross out is not, cross out will not. Number 5, cross out will, and number 5. The proposed use will not endanger the public health or safety. So make sure I'm doing this right. The proposed use is a condition of use. We know that. The character of the proposed use will be in harmony. Number 3, will not generate nuisances, so cross out the will. Number 4, will be adequately served by existing streets, public facilities, and services. Number 5, the proposed use will not endanger the public health or safety if located where proposed, so cross that out. Meets, now with the condition, meets all applicable development standards in the zoning code and will not be in conflict with the comprehensive plan. So is that okay? You happy with that?
Happy.
All right, good. Ann, you all right with that? You got everything?
We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye, and that is as well unanimous. And that ends that part of the meeting. Thank you. Board communications?
Yeah, I'd just like to introduce Ryan Cash as a new member of our department. He had replaced Becky, who had, as you recall, taken a job at the University of Idaho as Director of Parking and Transportation Services. So just wanted to welcome Ryan aboard and introduce him to the board as a new staff member that's going to be working with you in the future. So,
Welcome.
Well, Ryan was
Stellar haircut, by the way.
born and raised in Moscow, so he knows Moscow pretty well.
It's a pleasure being back in town, and look forward to working with all of you.
It's because you don't know, well, at least me yet.
Any forthcoming meetings that we should be aware of?
I don't believe we have any pending applications. You know, I guess maybe take a minute to follow up on Jerry's point at the beginning of the meeting about, you know, would the board be interested in meeting, you know, as a follow-up? I think, you know, I haven't addressed the board for maybe a couple years, but I know at one point we had brought that to the, you know, point of discussion about the possibility of going back and having a meeting that only lasted 10, 15 minutes just to approve the minutes and the relevant criteria and standards. So, you know, we were definitely open to doing that. But just taking into consideration,
I'd like
you
to
know,
make sure that we're not, that it's great that we're not having to come right back to sign stuff again. But by the same token, I'd like city council to actually, or not city council, our counselor, our city lawyer, to verify that we don't need to do that. Because if we do, we should probably take the right steps, even if it means coming in for a follow-up meeting, just to make sure that whatever I sign is correct and the rest of the board is aware of what it is I sign, even if it's something that can be inserted in the minutes so that once it's signed. The only difficulty with that is sometimes that doesn't happen right away, and so again, a person wouldn't necessarily know what that date was.
I mean, I spent just a few minutes, like 5 minutes right before coming down here, and there's a Bonneville County case where this. It's not like today is typically not this is not the moment. It's whenever we produce the written decision, suggesting those are two different things. And in that case, they were 2 months apart. I mean, to be kind of pragmatic about it, the last one, we should have had a separate meeting to go over the RCS, I think.
Just because it was controversial?
Because of I think both of the last
kind of
two, to
agree
be
with
honest
that.
with you. I think like today, especially where we adopt the RCS as proposed, without any changes, I don't know that we necessarily have any problems with it. And in fact, we can, although this doesn't really answer the question, I mean, of our options available to us, there's a whole bunch they give us, and they are to make the decision and adopt the reasoned statement of relevant criteria and standards. So we can either make the decision now and adopt them at a later date, make the decision now immediately followed by the adoption of relevant statement of the reasoned statement of relevant criteria and standards, which is what we just did now. Tentative decision, develop them, and meet again to go over them, or defer. Those are the four options that the code grants us. But I mean, where we aren't, anytime
We've
we
actually done the fourth option a couple times too, when we've approved something, but we didn't exactly know how to word it. How we worded it, and so we deferred it and then came back with that later. So
But we've kind of drafted here and then had Ann present us with whatever she figured out we came up with, and then, yeah. So
let's get a legal opinion from the city attorney and move
Yeah.
forward from that point.
I won't necessarily agree.
Well, I would just say that we've been through a couple city attorneys, and they've both held that this practice that the board does is legal. But, you know, I mean, we can certainly revisit that discussion with our new city attorney, since he's fairly new. So, you know, I think it's worth it just to have that discussion and get an opinion. So,
I think, and I don't know if, Ann, this is just something you do when you put them together. I do think they should always be included in the minutes, whatever are, even the ones. So like that, the ones from the last variance and conditional use permit, like then have never been provided in a public document, right? So they were signed by Linda, but they weren't part of our minutes today. Like they've never, unless somebody went down and asked you for them.
Weren't those the ones that were proposed, and are the ones that are proposed that we see, is that part of the public packet that's available to everybody out there?
the ones that are in the staff
Right,
report.
for example,
that are
we
proposed?
got, yeah, the ones that are in the staff report.
Yeah, certainly.
Because
Yeah.
I know
That's
we make reference to them all the time, because usually what we'll say is we'll just adopt them, and we've done that because they've been,
Yeah, and you know, that's the practice that I guess, you know, before I got here, that's what we had done is had staff provide some sample minutes, because I remember there had been some long meetings where the board was trying to go through one, you know, each individually, and try to craft the own criteria on the spot, and it was just taking up so much time in order to be able to do that.
We've also asked staff to propose them for us, so it's been a nice, you know,
Yeah,
more,
I mean,
often, more often than not,
We've written our own.
But
on a
I mean,
number
I
of
don't
occasions.
disagree. I don't disagree that I think the best practice is what Jerry's suggesting, which is, you know, cut and paste and stick them in the minutes, so there's just no question what we're talking about
And we,
From looking at historical records, there was a point in time when they were done that way in the city, but they had changed before I got here, and I was told that was not the
I don't
correct
think
way
it hurts
to
us
do
to
minutes,
have-
because minutes were just supposed to be a, I don't say snapshot, but just a
Yeah.
record
I
of
don't
the
think it hurts us to
official
have too much
actions,
information in the
not
minutes, though.
verbatim
I
recording
mean,
of what happened.
I agree with Jerry that, I mean, for sake of clarity, a copy and paste and.
It's kind of odd that we approve our minutes and yet never meet to approve the RCS. Like we didn't, and this is what made me think about it, is because as I was reading the other ones, something was added, and I don't know what it was. I haven't seen it. It wasn't in the minutes, and presumably it never came back to you guys as a written document that you could read and approve.
Well, for example, on the current one, on the minutes, page 5, let's see, we talked about adopting the RCS suggested by staff with the addition to number 1 that the high water table is a special circumstance. So I always thought that Ann does a pretty good job sticking, if we modify it, there's always something in there that.
I agree. I think
That was the verbatim piece that was added to what was already
Yeah.
presented in the staff report, which was being accepted as written with that little
With
piece
that one
added.
exception, yeah.
So that was the only piece I put in the minutes.
It's just, so we are a board of hearing examiners, and there are legal, like statutory requirements as to what our obligations are. And they include written documentation of all of our decisions, which to me sounds like more like what a court does, like we write decisions. And then the Supreme Court has said that the moment our decision is final is when we issue that written decision with the justifications for it. Right, so an explanation of how it meets the code, and it's the reason statement. It's probably supposed to be more than what we actually do, to be honest with you. And that's what provides city council with its record for appeal and a court for record for appeal, and then the public knowing what we've done. And that's all statutory. Like that's not something we can change. And so it just makes me nervous when, like, I look at the public record from that meeting and the RCS aren't there.
Well, isn't the public record also include the recorded record of the meeting itself?
Yeah, but that's not a written decision.
Right. No, I understand that. But you're talking about a record that we send up perhaps, and.
So the process on my end, after all is said and done, is, so I have the signed RCS that are here. They're in my folder, ready to be attached to the minutes that Joe's going to sign, because they just got approved tonight. And that all together gets scanned and put online as the official record of everything from that meeting. Now, I could have scanned the RCS and included them in your packet, but I don't know that that's getting at the statutory concern that you have.
It might.
It gives you the information, but it doesn't, it's only just, 3 days before this meeting.
Yeah, and they've already been approved, I mean, we approve
Well,
them.
that's kind of
you
my
approve them
question.
at the meeting, so you're approving the criteria. We put that same criteria in the RCS document, only we go through, the only thing that's different is we go through all the findings. So, and that's the record you speak of, so if it ever gets appealed to a higher court, council or the district court, then that's, we want to document the,
Right.
the process we went through.
But
in
it's
order
the
to
nature
increase
of the board issues a written decision. And, I mean, to me, what that means is there's a document that we all see and we approve, not signed by one person and none of the rest of us have actually seen the final
I see what he's saying,
document.
because we meet to approve the minutes, and that signed RCS was technically should have been part of those minutes. That's why I think it should just be included at the end.
The only problem with that is there are times when it goes 6 or 7 months.
Yeah.
Well, that
Right, and that's why,
And that's the reason why we've traditionally done it this way. Planning and Zoning Commission, City Council, you don't have an issue because they meet every 2 weeks.
Right.
So you can come back and approve that. I think
Even
that
planning and zoning will approve things as you present them that night. They don't always have to wait and do them the next meeting, right?
They don't have an obligation to
let's
provide
do
a
this,
written
Joe. Let's
decision.
get an opinion from the city attorney. And if, to be on the safe side, you talk about what our discussion was tonight, and be on the safe side, if we need to come back for a meeting as soon as possible as the minutes are out, we do it. No.
But then we have to notice,
No, we don't.
right?
Well, it's not a public.
It's a public meeting. We
It's a
have to
public
do the
meeting.
notice it as a public meeting, so 48 hours.
It's not a public hearing, it's a public meeting, so in reality, we could, meet the 48-hour notice and meet 2 days after we conduct the business of that night. So, I think probably the most valid point that Jerry brings up is the fact that when the RCS are signed, then the public don't know when that document's signed, because that's when the appeal period starts. So, I would say that is probably one of my highest concerns.
Yeah, and if we have the meeting, then Joe can sign them at that meeting.
Right at that point. Because that's when we would formally issue our written decision.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks.
So, just from a procedural standpoint, if the RCS, like for tonight's meeting, if we brought the RCS in the RCS document format, rather than just being part of the staff report, and you approve them here on site, you could still sign them tonight. So if we come with them in that form ahead of time?
That's probably not a bad idea, because, I mean, there's a high probability on and I'll just use the term run-of-the-mill
Tonight.
kind of a deal like tonight. There's usually very little reason to vary from what staff actually proposes, especially in a case like this where, it's non-controversial. And again, I'll use the word run-of-the-mill. So, and that might be something where you can say, okay, let's look at them, get them done tonight, or whenever the board is all present, eliminate the need for a new meeting.
I guess the only concern I would have about bringing the whole RCS document is the perception that the decision's already been made.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
And so I would be more comfortable to come back.
I mean, let me ask you this. On something like this tonight, how long would it take to put them together?
Across the parking lot?
No, I'm serious. I mean, because I'm willing to wait 5 or 10 minutes tonight rather than have to schedule 7 people's.
Minutes that take longer, but.
But I mean, do we need to approve the minutes at the same time that we approve the relative criterion standards? Because I mean, if we've got or the RCS is done, we approve that, and that's our decision. And that could be done. I mean, on a case like this, that could be done
when
tonight.
that's signed, that date's the date that the appeal starts, right? It has absolutely nothing to do with when the minutes are approved. And
Not
signed.
that I can
But if we had multiple hearings that same night, and we got controversial hearings, and we're here till midnight, are we going to sit around and wait for?
No, I mean, we don't want to do that. I mean, that's true. But I mean, on a simple case such as this, can you run them off? Can we approve them and eliminate the need to come back?
I think the better idea is to come back and look at them and approve them then, instead of trying to do it the same night. That's a lot to ask of Ann, too.
Come back in 2 days and just.
We need to get Ann a printer right there.
Yeah, I mean, we changed what the document contains. So it used to be pretty bare bones, where we would just have the hearing date, some information from the applicant, what it was pertaining to, and then you'd have the criteria, and then you'd have the justification for the criteria, and that was it. Now we had structured it such that you have findings of fact, and it goes through all the pertinent
Okay, so let me
facts
ask
of the
about that
case.
then. We never make findings of fact, or we haven't yet. We should, but we never have. This board, not since I've been here, has ever actually.
They used to call the relevant criteria findings of fact. They just changed the name.
Well, no, but those are so.
Well, the criteria needed for approval are what we see, or what you see. Findings of fact are just the basis for the decision, and Joe signs the document.
But we have to make the findings of fact as a body. And so you think about the way these things work. Your facts, we have to interpret the world in a way. We have to make findings of fact and then connect those to the legal requirements. And we can actually be overturned on both grounds. If our facts are unsupported by the record, then that can be reason to overturn a decision. And we never make findings. We kind of make them both at the same time.
Is it possible to? I think in times past when we've had a situation where we knew that we needed to come back and talk about things, there's been a draft circulated, and then when we come, we approve whatever happens. Do we run afoul of any open meeting issues if we're circulating a draft?
No, because it's usually public record. I mean, if we were conducting a public meeting, and there's 48 hours notice, that would just be whatever's attached to the public meeting. So, no.
Because it seems to me that might be the most efficient way, is get something drafted for us to take a look at, and then we can approve the findings of fact or whatever the factual basis is at the same time we're approving the RCSs.
I think that matters more for variances, which we've never done. I mean, because you have to you have to conclude something about the parcel at issue. That it is too steep to allow construction of a house or something. I mean, you have to make that factual finding, and we haven't actually ever done that. Of course, you all know I think we approve variances far too much, but.
I don't know if you've ever approved a variance. No, you
I
approved one variance.
You guys all
and
voted against me.
And it surprised us.
And then the city council overturned your decision.
It surprised us. That's right.
I'll just throw out the one other thing with coming back again a couple days later is the whole issue of finding quorum or the right quorum and this meeting room space.
But a quorum is only 3.
Well, we've come in at like
5:15
5:15 or
The
so.
code says 3.
It's half plus one.
The code says 3.
Yeah, there's something weird about Board of Adjustment in the code. It says 3.
The code, in fact, says 3, and then if it's only 3, it requires a unanimous vote. But the code says 3.
Yeah. It's the only commission that has the quorum stated that way.
Yeah. I don't think that's as hard as we've been making it. But and again, it has to be unanimous if it's 3.
So last time we did this, we got our calendars out and looked to see when everyone would be available. And if I remember right, we did it about 5 o'clock. I mean, it was right at the close of business or pretty close to it.
I think on like today, I think there's a difference between approving the language and approving the formatting. And we approved the exact language today, and all that's going to change is the formatting. And so I think we can trust Joe to compare the language and assure it's the same language. But where it's new language we've never seen, that's when I think we actually need to come.
But that's what I think we've been doing, because we have approved it, and then as our chair, he has spoken for us when he's approved those things, and presumably you look at it.
Right. Yeah.
But there's a difference between whether the formatting's right and whether it's a whole new decision that we've never seen before.
Well, when you say new language, how much new language are you talking about?
Well, I think anything we haven't seen in writing, I think we all have to approve the actual writing. We have to actually see the final writing and approve it. Otherwise, it's not the board issuing a written decision. That's the way I look at it. We have to approve the written decision, I think. And then again, maybe.
So I guess I'm lost on how you're distinguishing tonight.
Because there's nothing in the language that's going to change.
But in this last one, where
you added a condition.
Just 5 words, and it
but the condition is the
minutes.
approval. It's not the RCS.
Oh, right. But like in this other one,
which is why I did them separately for that reason.
But we did change it. We struck out some of the language.
Yeah, but we all saw that. We're all here, and we all approved that change.
Still, it'd be a lot cleaner if it was.
I mean, I think those are. If you have, I mean, if we either write our own on the fly and trust Ann to write it down, or if they're proposed and we go about changing it and never see a final written document, those are the ones I think in particular that we should do. And I think with Logos or with the skating rink or something, we definitely should come back and look at them if we think they're going to be appealed. But either way, I'd like to see final written documents, like the actual language in final form. That's kind of what but like you said, we can ask the city attorney and get an opinion. And
sure. Yeah, we'll contact the city attorney and have him issue an opinion. So.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. All right, have a motion to adjourn?
Let's go.
Motion, second?
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're done. Good night.